The automatic doors of St. Mary's Hospital slid open at 4:15 in the afternoon on a cold December Tuesday. Security Officer Marcus Williams was standing near the entrance, sipping weak coffee from the break room, when he felt the shift in air. His training had taught him to notice things. Years of watching people enter the hospital had sharpened his instincts into something almost supernatural. Something was different this time. The man who walked through those doors was impossible to ignore. He wore a black leather jacket, weathered and cracked from decades of road dust and exposure. The Hells Angels emblem was sewn across the back in massive red and white stitching, a winged skull that seemed to stare directly at anyone who looked at it. His beard was long and gray, braided at the bottom with small silver rings. Chains hung from his jeans. Scars crossed his face like a topographical map of a life lived dangerously. This was Rico Delgado, president of the Hells Angels chapter covering 3 states. Everyone in the city knew who he was, though most people had only seen pictures. Nobody expected to see him here, in a hospital, walking deliberately toward the reception desk. The lobby fell silent. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had pressed mute on the world. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A nurse dropped her clipboard. An elderly woman grabbed her husband's arm. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. He'd read the manual about handling situations involving gang members, but the manual seemed inadequate now, insufficient for what was actually happening. Behind Rico came 3 other bikers, equally imposing, equally intimidating. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone commanded the air in the room. Marcus moved his hand toward his radio, then hesitated. Something was wrong with this scenario. Rico's face wasn't angry. There was no aggression radiating from him like he'd expected. His jaw was clenched, but not in rage. His eyes were wet. The security officer made a split-second decision and didn't call for backup. Rico approached the reception desk where Jenny Chen, a 23-year-old volunteer, sat frozen in her chair. She'd gone completely pale. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk. Rico took a slow, deliberate breath. When he spoke, his voice was nothing like what anyone expected. It wasn't a growl or a threat. It was quiet, almost broken. "My grandson," he said simply. "He came in an hour ago. Car accident on Highway 7. Name is Marcus Delgado. He's 7 years old. Can you tell me where he is?" The words hung in the air like they were made of something heavy and fragile. The entire lobby had heard them. Suddenly, the leather jacket made sense. The chains, the beard, the terrifying appearance, it all seemed to melt away, leaving behind something more human, more vulnerable. A grandfather searching for his injured grandchild. Jenny's eyes filled with tears. She typed frantically into her computer, her fingers finally responsive. Around the lobby, people watched. A few got out their phones, but put them away again. This wasn't a story to be captured. This was something sacred, even if they didn't quite understand it yet. "Pediatric intensive care," Jenny whispered. "3rd floor. West wing. His parents are already there. They're asking for family. Go to the nurse's station, and they'll take you back." Rico nodded. His 3 companions stayed near the entrance, forming an unspoken barrier between him and the rest of the world. The biker president turned toward the elevators, his movements deliberate and careful, as if he were walking through a dream he might wake up from. But he wouldn't wake up. What waited for him on the 3rd floor was real, terrifying, and about to change everything. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Marcus Williams realized he was still holding his breath. Around the hospital, people returned to their conversations, but the energy was different now. Everyone was thinking about a 7-year-old boy on the 3rd floor, a man in a leather jacket with a broken heart, and whatever terrible thing had brought them together on this cold December afternoon. Down in the hospital's basement, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo was making notes on little Marcus Delgado's case when her phone buzzed with a message from upstairs. It was unusual to receive alerts about family arriving in pediatric intensive care, but this one came with a warning: Hells Angels president entering facility. Increase security to 3rd floor, West Wing ICU. Sarah felt her stomach twist. She'd been practicing medicine for 18 years and had learned not to judge people by their appearance. She treated everyone from CEOs to homeless people, from choir singers to people involved in organized crime. But the basement of a hospital felt suddenly less safe. She locked her office door and listened to the sounds around her. Sarah had spent the last hour studying the medical file of a boy who was clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. The car accident had been catastrophic. The drunk driver who hit them had been going 60 miles per hour in a residential zone. Marcus's parents, Rico's son Daniel and his wife Patricia, were upstairs now, watching their child breathe through a ventilator, waiting for the swelling in his brain to decrease. But now Sarah was thinking about something else entirely. She was thinking about a story she'd heard years ago, something that had stuck with her through her entire medical career. The story was about a biker gang leader who donated his kidney to save a stranger's life. She'd never confirmed whether it was true, but it had changed how she thought about people and their capacity for goodness. Could this be that man? She opened her computer and searched the news archives, typing carefully, Hells Angels Rico Delgado. The search results came back immediately. There were articles about police investigations, charges that were dropped, witness testimonies that contradicted each other. But there was also something else. Articles about community programs. Pictures of Rico at schools, at charity events, at youth centers. One headline caught her eye, Biker Leader Raises Funds for Children's Hospital. It was from 5 years ago. She read the article carefully. Rico had organized a motorcycle charity event that raised $200,000 for pediatric cancer research. The article quoted him saying something she never forgot, kids don't choose the world they are born into. It's our job to make it better for them. Sarah leaned back in her chair. She closed the browser and opened the medical file again. Young Marcus Delgado needed a miracle. He needed something beyond what modern medicine could currently provide. He needed time for the swelling to reduce, for the bruising on his brain to heal, for his tiny body to fight back against the trauma it had endured. She didn't know that upstairs, on the 3rd floor, his grandfather had just arrived. She didn't know yet what Rico was about to do. But something in her bones told her that the appearance of this man in their hospital was going to matter. That it was going to change something fundamental about how this case would unfold. Sarah printed out the medical file and headed upstairs. If the Hells Angels president was in the building, she wanted to meet him. She wanted to look him in the eye and tell him everything about his grandson's condition. She wanted to hear from him what he was willing to do to fight for the child's life. As she rode the elevator up, Sarah rehearsed what she would say. She thought about the article she'd just read, about the charity event, about a man who seemed to believe that protecting children was a sacred duty. She thought about the moment she was about to share with a family in the worst situation of their lives. And she wondered what revelation was waiting for them all on the 3rd floor. Rico stood in the waiting room outside the ICU, looking at his grandson through the thick glass window. The boy was impossibly small, connected to machines that beeped and hummed. Tubes ran from his nose and mouth. Bandages covered his head. But his heart was still beating. His lungs were still breathing, even if machines were helping them. Daniel, Rico's son, came out into the waiting room. His eyes were swollen from crying. Patricia hovered behind him, her whole body shaking. They both looked like they'd been hollowed out, like they'd been aged 50 years in the span of a single day. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Thank you for coming." Rico pulled his son into an embrace. For a moment, the powerful biker leader was just a father trying to comfort his son. When he released him, his face was wet with tears. "Tell me everything," Rico said. "Everything the doctors said." Daniel explained that the swelling in Marcus's brain was severe but manageable if it continued to decrease over the next 72 hours. The broken ribs would heal. The internal bleeding had stopped. But the brain injury was the unknown factor. They wouldn't know the full extent of the damage until he woke up, if he woke up. As if summoned by the conversation, Dr. Okonkwo appeared in the doorway. She changed into fresh scrubs and had the air of someone about to deliver important information. She introduced herself and led the family into a small consultation room. Rico sat beside his son, his large hand covering Daniel's smaller one. Dr. Okonkwo explained Marcus's condition with practiced kindness. She explained that children were remarkably resilient, that brain plasticity gave them advantages that adults didn't have. She explained the treatment plan, the monitoring protocol, the timeline for observations. And then she looked directly at Rico. "I need to ask about family medical history," Dr. Okonkwo said carefully. "Are there any genetic conditions we should know about? Any blood type sensitivities? Any hereditary issues that might affect his recovery?" Rico shook his head. "He's healthy. Strong. Like his grandfather," he said with a slight smile that faded almost immediately. "I'm asking," Dr. Okonkwo continued carefully, "because there's something unusual about his case. It's not common in children, but we've seen it before. Sometimes, when a young person experiences severe trauma, their body goes into a kind of protective state. Blood pressure drops. Heart rate slows to a level that preserves oxygen flow to the brain. It's an evolutionary adaptation that buys time for healing." She paused, choosing her words with precision. Marcus's body has done this naturally. His healing faster than we anticipated. But what would accelerate his recovery even more would be donor resources. Specifically, we could use stem cells from a close biological relative. Someone genetically similar enough to provide cellular material that his body wouldn't reject. Dr. Okonkwo let the implication hang in the air. Rico understood immediately. "Take what you need from me," he said without hesitation. "It's not that simple," Dr. Okonkwo said. "The procedure is experimental. There are risks to the donor. There are no guarantees of success. I need you to understand that fully before you agree to anything." "I don't care about the risks," Rico said flatly. "I've lived a life where risk is constant. I've done things I regret. I've hurt people I shouldn't have hurt. I've made choices that kept me awake at night. If I can do something now, something that might save my grandson's life, then every risk in the world is nothing compared to that." His voice filled the room with certainty. There was no doubt in it, no wavering. "If you cut me open right now and take whatever you need, I'll thank you for the opportunity," Rico continued. "Because this boy, he represents something different for my family. He's the future. He's the part of us that doesn't have to live in the darkness. He's the chance to break a cycle that's been running through my family for generations." Daniel was crying openly now, his head on his father's shoulder. "Okay," Dr. Okonkwo said quietly. "We'll need to run some tests first, to make sure you're a viable match. But I believe you're serious about this." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Rico replied. As he stood to follow Dr. Okonkwo to the testing lab, Rico looked back one more time at his grandson through the ICU window. And in that moment, everyone watching, the doctors, the nurses, the family members in the waiting room, understood something fundamental about human nature. They understood that love could exist in the most unexpected places, that redemption was possible, and that sometimes the most dangerous-looking people carried the softest hearts. 4 hours later, Rico sat in a recovery room after the extraction procedure. His arm was bandaged. His body felt weaker than he could remember. But his mind was sharp, focused on one question: would the stem cells help? The medical team had extracted the material successfully. Now it would be cultured, processed, and prepared for introduction into Marcus's body. Dr. Okonkwo had explained that the process would take another 48 hours. Those 48 hours stretched ahead of them like an infinity. Daniel sat in the chair beside his father's bed. Patricia had gone back to Marcus's room. The three bikers, Rico's closest friends and most trusted lieutenants, stood watch outside the door. To anyone looking at them, they appeared menacing. In reality, they were protecting something sacred, the privacy of a family in crisis. "Dad," Daniel said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Rico turned his head carefully, the movement sending small waves of discomfort through his recovering body. "I used to think I understood what you were," Daniel continued. "I thought you were just this dangerous man who rode motorcycles and broke laws. When I was young, I was angry at you for not being like other fathers. I wanted you to have a normal job, a normal life, a normal family." Rico nodded slowly. He'd heard versions of this before. "But then I grew up, and I started to understand the real you," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I understood that you used the club to protect people. That you gave to charities anonymously. That you took kids from bad homes and gave them jobs and mentorship. I understood that your life, as complicated and dangerous as it was, came from a place of trying to prevent other people from experiencing the pain you'd experienced." Daniel wiped his eyes. "When Marcus was born, I saw you with him for the first time, and I realized something. You weren't trying to be a grandfather in the traditional sense. You were trying to be protection, insurance, love, all rolled into one. And now, lying in this hospital bed, giving him part of yourself, you're still doing exactly that." Rico's eyes glistened with fresh tears. He reached out his unbandaged hand and gripped his son's arm. "I'm not a good man," Rico said quietly. "I've done things. Things that can't be undone, that shouldn't be undone, that I'll answer for when my time comes. But you and Patricia, and now Marcus, you're proof that I'm not just the darkness. You're proof that something good can come from something broken." Outside the room, Dr. Okonkwo walked past, checking charts. She made notes about Rico's recovery. His vitals were stable. His body was handling the extraction well. But what really struck her was the resilience of the human spirit. She'd spent 18 years in medicine studying disease and injury, focusing on what was broken in the human body. But this case was teaching her something different. It was teaching her that sometimes what was broken in the body could be healed by what was unbroken in the heart. In the ICU down the hall, Marcus remained unconscious. His brain swelling had decreased by 8%. The bleeding had stopped completely. His little body was healing faster than expected, just as Dr. Okonkwo had predicted. Within 48 hours, the stem cells would be introduced. And then they would wait. That night, the hospital fell into the particular silence of the late hours. Visitors had gone home. Regular patients slept. And in a small corner of St. Mary's, a grandfather in a hospital bed and his son kept vigil together, waiting for morning to bring them closer to knowing whether their sacrifice would matter. The three bikers outside the door played cards quietly. Other members of the Hells Angels began arriving throughout the night, dozens of them, their motorcycles lined up in the parking lot like a wall of protective presence. They didn't come inside. They didn't need to. They were there anyway, every single one of them, waiting with their leader's family. Waiting to see if love could do what medicine alone could not. 68 hours after the stem cell introduction, Marcus Delgado opened his eyes. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. There was no moment of consciousness where he jolted awake. Instead, it was gradual, a slow return from the darkness, like someone rising through water toward light. His eyes fluttered first. Then his fingers twitched. Then, impossibly, a small sound came from his throat. The monitors erupted into activity. Alarms sounded. Dr. Okonkwo was summoned. Within moments, the ICU was controlled chaos, medical professionals checking vital signs, running tests, confirming what the machines were already telling them. Marcus Delgado was waking up. Patricia was the first one to him, her hands careful and gentle as she touched her son's small face. Daniel came next, and then Rico, who stood in the doorway of the ICU, watching his grandson blink slowly, begin the journey back to consciousness. "Hi, buddy," Patricia whispered. "Can you hear me? Can you squeeze my hand?" A tiny hand moved, responding to her voice. The pressure was weak but unmistakable. Marcus was coming back. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus became more responsive. His eyes tracked movement. He made sounds. A neurological examination showed no signs of severe damage. The physical therapists came in and tested muscle response. Everything was responding better than anyone had dared to hope. By evening, Marcus was awake enough to recognize his parents. His eyes found theirs and held them. He couldn't speak through the breathing tube yet, but he could communicate through gesture, through the flex of his fingers, through the expression in his eyes. He was there. He was present. He was going to be okay. Dr. Okonkwo spoke with the family in the waiting room. The stem cells appear to have had a significant effect. The inflammation in his brain has decreased dramatically. The neural damage that we were most concerned about doesn't seem to be as extensive as the initial scans suggested. He's going to need physical therapy, neurological rehabilitation, continued monitoring, but I believe he's going to make a full recovery. Patricia collapsed against Daniel, both of them crying. Rico stood motionless, processing the words. His grandson was going to live. The sacrifice had mattered. The hospital staff had never seen anything quite like what happened next. The three bikers outside quietly spread word to the waiting members in the parking lot. Within minutes, the Hells Angels chapter had learned that Marcus was awake and recovering. And something extraordinary happened. They began to pray. Not in any formal or structured way, but genuinely, sincerely, these rough men in leather jackets and chains stood together in the parking lot and sent their gratitude into the universe. For a child's recovery. For a grandfather's love. For the unexpected grace that had moved through their hospital. When Rico finally went to sit beside Marcus's bed, the boy was sleeping, his breathing more natural now, his body beginning the long journey of healing. Rico reached out and touched his grandson's small hand, careful not to disturb the monitors and 4 lines. "Welcome back, little man," Rico whispered. Over the next few weeks, as Marcus recovered and was eventually released from the hospital, the story began to spread. Local news outlets picked it up. A video of Rico leaving the hospital with Marcus in his arms, the tiny boy in his grandfather's embrace, the biker covered in tattoos and scars carrying his grandchild with infinite gentleness, went viral. The public reaction was overwhelming. But what struck people most wasn't the dramatic appearance of the Hells Angels president. What struck them was understanding, finally, that people were rarely just one thing. Rico Delgado wasn't just a biker. He was a grandfather. He wasn't just a leader of a motorcycle club. He was a man capable of profound love and sacrifice. He was proof that anyone, regardless of their past, regardless of their choices, could matter in the world. Anyone could love. Anyone could change. 6 months later, Marcus attended kindergarten. He had regular therapy. His recovery was progressing beautifully. And every afternoon when school ended, his grandfather was there waiting, his motorcycle idling, ready to take his grandson home. The hospital never forgot that December day when the Hells Angels leader walked through their doors. They never forgot what he taught them about the complexity of human nature, about love transcending appearance, about sacrifice that asked for nothing in return. And they certainly never forgot little Marcus, whose awakening taught them that sometimes the most powerful healing happens not through medicine alone, but through the fierce, desperate, unconditional love of family.